Hello, my name's Rob Dowie. This presentation is designed to help teachers successfully move from Cambridge Nationals ICT to Cambridge Nationals Creative iMedia. The most important thing to note is that the language for Creative iMedia and ICT at times is very different, one developing from media and the other from IT. Equally, as many of the iMedia could be considered as specialist units, such as digital photography, storytelling with a comic strip, creating 2D and 3D digital characters, the content of LO1, which generally does not exist in ICT, requires candidates to, in effect, research current practices and examples of products that are currently used. Equally, there are no strands in Creative iMedia, with centres in addition to R081 and R082 selecting the most appropriate units from those available. R082, the mandatory unit for iMedia, is creating digital graphics, quite different from the mandatory R002 from the ICT Nationals, which is a composite of content that can be further developed when completing other units. For example, the model assignment for R002 requires candidates to use spreadsheets and databases, which has some bearing on R003 and R004 should that be followed. Clearly, those units which are not matched between iMedia and ICT would require some significant additional resources. For example, R084 will require specialist software to effectively deliver the unit, such as Comic Life. Additionally, R089 requires candidates to record original video footage, and therefore the equipment needed must be sufficient to allow this to be done. Many of the resources will, in most likelihood, already be being used if moving from ICT to iMedia. 7 of the ICT units have no direct match to the iMedia course, and resources are not likely to be transferred across. These units are not linked to ICT, but in themselves are popular units which often allow creative students more readily to engage with the course. Although for R005, many centres may use game making software as the vehicle for demonstrating the interactive product. Of the units currently available on the ICT course, only 3 directly match. However, many centres may find the transition from ICT to iMedia allows them greater flexibility, as from a single ICT unit 2 or more units from the iMedia course could be followed. For example, from R005, centres could choose to do R085 and or R087. Equally, from R007, centres could select either R086, R088 or R089, although R088 and R089 can't be done together. As a consequence, the greater flexibility in selecting the most appropriate unit that is linked to the candidate's needs and the resources available should help centres when selecting the units to follow. One of the areas that centres transitioning into iMedia need to consider is the use of the learning outcomes. iMedia has 4 LOs and ICT has 3. Generally, LO1 within iMedia course is not required within the ICT course. For example, for R085 LO1, candidates are identifying from a range of multimedia websites the component features of these websites in the public domain, the devices used to access the web pages, and the methods used to connect to the internet. Candidates should then be applying this knowledge to both the target audience and the client requirements for LO2. Equally, for LO2, R085, a site plan and visualization are noted. This is broader for R005, where mood boards, spider diagrams are also included within the planning techniques. Whereas LO1, R005, source and store the multimedia components, The sourcing and importing assets is required for LO3 R085. For LO2, candidates must be able to identify the assets and resources, including the software, and show they've understood the purpose of them before sourcing and importing. Candidates are required to use tools and techniques in the web authoring software for R085, although this is not restricted to commercial packages, as these tools and techniques can be demonstrated through a HTML editor. As R005 is not limited to web pages, the emphasis is on the navigation system, interactivity and effects, including the use of advanced techniques of the software specific to product being created. This could include web authoring, game making, app development, or presentation authoring software. LO4 R085 requires candidates to review the finished website themselves and identify improvements which are appropriate. For R005, candidates are required to obtain feedback and analyse the feedback in relation to the success criteria identified from LO1, along with evidence of testing the product during production and post-completion. R082 is a mandatory unit for iMedia, and many centres may already be undertaking R006, which means transitioning between one and the other should be relatively straightforward. Images and graphics, what's the difference? In the context of the units, they're used interchangeably, whereas R006 would refer to vector-based images, bitmap, raster-based images. Within LO2, R082 refers to types of digital graphics, i.e. bitmap, raster, vector. Note the comments for LO1 and LO4 given in the previous slides for R085. For LO1, R006, candidates are sourcing the components for the digital image, whereas R082, candidates are identifying the assets and resources and understanding their purpose first for LO2. Both require candidates to understand legislative constraints in relation to the use of digital assets. For LO3, R082, candidates are creating assets, for example adapting existing graphics and storing them in a library that could be used again later, rather than using tools and techniques within the software to create the graphic that will be used only for the requirements of the model assignment. Both units require candidates to use a range of tools and techniques. Although R006 details the software tools, including specialist tools to enhance digital images. For LO3 R082, candidates need to be able to export the graphic in appropriate formats. This will most likely require them to export the same graphic but use it in two different contexts, i.e. web-based or print-based. The transition to iMedia allows for greater flexibility when considering R007. Essentially, three distinct and separate units can be selected rather than the one currently available for ICT. Although it is important to note that R088 and R089 are barred combinations. There is no direct comparison between these units. R007 requires candidates to combine sound and some form of vision, which could be a movie or animation or a combination of all three. R089 essentially requires candidates to create an original video sequence. LO2 R007 and LO3 R089 are the creation of the product. The principal difference is for R007, candidates are not in themselves creating original footage, which they are required to do for R089. Therefore, candidates for R089 would be expected to use different camera shots, movement, settings and lighting. However, using software features to edit the video or movie for R007 would be very similar and would cover some of those used in the creation for R089, i.e. transitions, pan and zoom. LO1 R089 is consistent with most iMedia units, essentially a pre-planning stage identifying uses of digital video and the file formats and properties, which has some link to LO1 R007. There are few similarities between LO3 R007 and LO4 R089. LO3 R007 requires candidates to prepare a task plan and carry out testing during and post completion, whereas LO4 R089 requires candidates to review the product against the brief and identify areas for improvement.